Hi everybody, my name is Rob Scott from UC Today, and in this session I'm joined by Gary Forrest, CEO at Pure IP, and we also have a special guest, Scott Rendell, Customer Success Manager at Microsoft. In this session, we're going to be discussing COVID-19 and the impact it's had on the enterprise. So welcome everybody.
Welcome. Thank you.
No, it's great to have you here. I think the best place to start, before we get stuck into the conversation, how about we have a round of introductions? Gary, would you like to go first?
Certainly. I'm Gary Forrest, Chief Executive of Pure IP. Pure IP is an international SIP trunk provider, providing numbers, PSTN replacement services for enterprises around the world.
And good morning or good afternoon. I'm Scott Rendell, Customer Success Manager with Microsoft. Microsoft, the global provider of all sorts of software and cloud services.
Great stuff. Thanks for that. So to kick off with, I mean, we all know about the pandemic. We're right in the middle of it as we record this session today, and it's had a dramatic impact on organizations, small and large. But today we're going to particularly focus in on the larger organizations, that would say the mid-market or the enterprises that are out there. So Gary, I wanted to kick off maybe with the first question. Kind of, were the enterprise or was the enterprise ready for the pandemic?
I think many of them were. We had a good number of customers that hadn't anticipated the volumes, or the increased volumes in traffic, be it internet traffic or voice traffic, as a consequence of actually having to move workers to working remotely. So 3 weeks ago, I'm sure it was the case for most telecoms business. Pure IP was no different. We spent a lot of time trying to help customers reconfigure their networks and build them extra capacity very quickly to accommodate their business needs. And so my feeling is, post COVID-19, there's going to be a lot of companies looking to review how they operate under these circumstances again.
And I think I could echo that as well. We were seeing a trend with our customers in that they were beginning to move to a remote workforce or a partially remote workforce. And that certainly was accelerated dramatically with the current pandemic. But yeah, absolutely agree.
Great stuff. And, just focusing on the challenges then that the organizations have faced. I mean, it almost felt like overnight, almost all organizations had to think about remote working or home working. So, what kinds of challenges were the enterprises facing?
For us, customers that were using on-premise PBXs were running out of bandwidth, for example, MPLS bandwidth, because they'd suddenly had to connect a large volume of audio conference calls, or we're now trying to connect a lot of remote users using VPN services. I think a lot of IT teams were deployed trying to reconfigure VPN services to actually be able to run multiple applications real time for a working day. So, every company's always had some people working remotely. You suddenly had a situation where you had thousands working remotely, and did they have the actual servers and the capacity to be able to deal with that? Those were the two biggest challenges I think we've witnessed. There was also those who were working remotely was actually getting the call quality to make sure the call quality was good, because if people were suddenly making sales calls or taking support calls reputationally, customers were trying to keep the same standards they would have done if they were actually operating from an office.
I think that's a great point, Gary. And what we found was that it wasn't so much that people weren't necessarily ready to work from home. I mean, everybody's got internet, and most of your semi-mobile workforce has laptops, so they were ready. But what we found, surprisingly enough, was the devices, headsets. Gary, you're wearing a headset today. I'm on what we call a puck, a speakerphone. A lot of people didn't have those. And so communication from an audio and or video standpoint was a real challenge. So that was surprising. Some of the vendors that we use, that make these headsets and things like that, were tapped out. Their stores were in backlog, and they were reaching out to us saying, you got to help us with your customers so they can get devices and get more qualified devices to be able to use in this work from home scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we know, we ran out of supplies in lots of different areas all over the world, didn't we? So I completely echo the homework and equipment piece. I mean, even I got a call from a friend that said, what's the best webcam to buy? I pointed it to a webcam, it was sold out, which normally that, branded webcam would not be sold out. So yes, absolutely. That's a real challenge. And certainly, as Gary mentioned, bandwidth, infrastructure capacity, that's a really good point as well. What about the security issue? Because we've had a lot of issues with security in the mainstream press around certain brands, and that's been a real challenge. And it's kind of almost, was that an afterthought for a lot of enterprises, as they were rushing out to deploy video conferencing and collaboration platforms?
I think it was. I think everyone was in a rush to actually just keep their staff or their employees operational. I think so. Things were compromised. I don't think there was a lot of thought given to the long-term implications of actually how people were operating. How people were set up at home. Did they have open servers that actually could be compromised by actually people scanning those IPs, etc.? I think now we're starting to see customers come back, talk to us about what they should be putting in place, and also to re-examine what they have to do in the longer term, because actually what they have in place currently isn't going to be sustainable.
From our standpoint, deploying Microsoft Teams in Office 365, the security was already there. We have different levels of it, but the baseline security was there. So our customers were already familiar with that journey and how that works. If anything, it might have accelerated the purchase of the more advanced security licenses that we offer in Office 365. But most of our customers were already on that journey, using Teams both at their office and remotely.
And I suppose a lot of Microsoft Teams customers are using it for collaboration. They're not necessarily all using it for phone system capabilities. So was there a kind of period where there was or is there still a period where there's a mad rush for kind of direct routing capabilities, so they could, really ditch the PBX and move on to onto Microsoft Teams for calling?
I would have thought there would have been more call for that, but there really wasn't. The fact that you can do an audio call via IP on Teams or a video call in the same manner left them being perfectly collaborative. And what we were hearing was a lot of customers, if they did need to actually make a call, they would just grab their cell phone. That said, the customers that we had already started the phone system and calling plan or direct routing journey with has kept going. And in just a couple of my enterprise customers, it might have accelerated a little bit, but not tremendously. So, because the fact that you can communicate like we are now, we didn't see a real big uptake in the phone system requirements. But they're going to be there. We're already hearing our customers say, what's this going to look like moving forward? How are we going to deal with these kinds of things? So the conversations are there, but they were more focused on just getting their workforce back together, up and running online in an online scenario, where they weren't so much worried about calling just yet. But we're seeing that trend start to shift a little bit.
I think that's right. And I think also the cost aspect of this will be important as well. I think everyone will just sort of took no bearing in cost to keep themselves operational. As the dust is now settling, we're going to see people come back and revisit it, so that lots of calls are being redirected to mobiles. That's going to be revisited when everyone starts to look at the numbers a month on.
Yeah, I imagine there's a lot of plans that have been put in place overnight that aren't sustainable. And I know Pure IP are big on direct routing and connecting the kind of external world with a Microsoft Teams platform. So it seems to be, it's getting a lot of interest at the moment. So are you having a lot of those conversations too with your customers?
Yes, we are. We've got a lot of customers that were actually starting the journey between different versions of Microsoft towards Teams. They're now starting to accelerate that. We're also getting a lot more customers with other PBX platforms that aren't as cloud friendly, and where voice quality or costs are going to have an implication for them should they have to run this in a long-term mode. So we are starting to have conversations about, we're now looking at Microsoft Teams or other platforms, but principally Teams is where we've got our specialization, and starting to migrate towards that, because they see the benefits of actually having cloud-based systems if you're going to have a distributed workforce.
Are there any other challenges that organizations facing right now. We have talked about demand and capacity. We've talked about the security element attached to deploying things like this overnight. Gary, is there anything else that's going through the CIO's mind right now?
I think it is. I think it's also about actually how you manage your workforce or your employees. A lot of people are used to working in teams. And now what you've actually got to do is actually use the tools available to you from home to actually manage that team and keep people working together, making sure that people actually know what's going on. The communication element in its broadest sense is now the challenge. So you sort of deal with the IT infrastructure, the platform. You've now got to keep people engaged and make sure that all of the people actually feel they know what they're doing. And there's been many articles in various journals at the moment about how difficult that's proving for a lot of CIOs and companies to keep people together. I think one article was in law firms, for example, where lawyers are used to working in teams, particularly their associates. If they've not got that collaborative environment, how do you keep the law firms moving forward? That was one example, but there's others as well with the same challenge. And I think that's going to be one that's going to stay with us for some considerable time. And the digitization of the world is going to make that become a bigger topic of conversation.
Something that we're seeing is the need for training. And so it kind of feeds right into Gary's conversation. The IT people that we're dealing with are saying, hey, we're rolling all this stuff out. Our people need training. And so the Microsoft Store personnel, who of course are now not in their stores, have stepped up to offer these trainings. And it's fantastic because we can just put them in touch with the store personnel and they can take over and then we can shift and move on to the next customer. So from a training standpoint, it's been fantastic. And to Gary's point about people having to learn how to work together remotely, one of the things I do when I give a training session is I try to make the comparison of a physical action to something you would do in teams. So for example, you're working in a collaborative mode and someone says, hey, come over here and take a look at this, the stand over your shoulder kind of thing. Well, in Teams, that's a screen share. So, if we were going to get a bunch of people in a room and start drawing out plans for some sort of new promotion or new project, that's whiteboard. Okay, so I try to take all those physical actions and turn them back into something that you can do on Teams so that people can connect the dots, if you will.
Yeah, and there is so much in Microsoft Teams that it's a very fully comprehensive platform nowadays, isn't it? So lots to learn. I can imagine user adoption being a real challenge, and certainly for the different generations as well that we have in organizations nowadays. So everyone wants to learn in a slightly different way. So interesting stuff. So in terms of going forward, I mean, we are still in the middle of the restrictions. We're not allowed, to go very far. Organizations are still wondering when we can get back to normal. So I'm not going to ask you to get your crystal balls out, but I'm going to ask you kind of how do you think things might play out in the near future as we maybe come to an end, as things come to an end and we're allowed out and businesses can get back to normal. Gary, do you want to take that one first?
Sure. I don't think what was normal before is ever going to be the same again, is my own view of it. I think the digitization of the world is actually only going to be accelerated by what's happened. I do think that a number of people, particularly in large cities, are going to be uncomfortable going immediately back to work even when the lockdowns are released. So I think you're going to find an acceleration of people working remotely, either indefinitely or more frequently than they were before. So the long debate that's been inside organizations about do we want remote workers, how do you manage them, and so on, I think that's going to come right to the top of the agenda. So I think that the companies from a unified communications perspective are going to have to modify their strategy to accommodate this. And I do think that the way in which we work, the way in which we sell, the way in which we support customers and support businesses is going to change considerably. I don't think travel and other things is going to be as frequent as it was before. So how you actually sell to your customers and support those customers and manage those customers is going to change as well. So I think we're in an entirely different journey, and I don't think what I understood normal for the last 20 years or so of my working life is going to be what it is on post lockdown.
I think we're going to see companies loosen their work in the office programs and allow more people working from home. And they've had to accelerate that. So I think it's going to change a little bit. So I think we'll start to see the industry respond with new applications that allow working from home better, allow people to be managed better, working remotely, possibly better analytics around, how their day is going, and a lot more video calling, because people still want to have that interpersonal connection.
Yeah, absolutely. The video thing's really important, isn't it, for remote working, home working, anywhere working. And it just seems everyone's switched on video now. Cameras on, people. It just seems that everyone is happy to use it, and I certainly hope so. Anyway, in terms of the impact on industry, if we're going to be, seeing a lot more interest in remote working technology, then does that mean we're going to see an acceleration of PBX to cloud? Do you think in the marketplace, Gary?
I do. Yes, I think that cloud is going to make it easier for companies to be able to manage this. I don't think every company is set up with data centers to be able to host their own equipment, nor does it actually make a lot of economic sense or technical sense for them to do that. So I think there is definitely going to be an accelerated program towards the cloud. And whether that's from a telephony perspective or the whole unified communication perspective, I think it's going to be the latter. And I think people are going to accommodate in their budgets to be able to do that. Projects are going to be brought forward that we're probably going to run over the course of the next couple of years. And I think people are going to want to prepare. Worst case, we might have a second wave of this. And I think the lessons learned from the first wave is going to have to be adopted to manage it better.
Yeah.
Come back to your point on infrastructure. I think the thing that's from a government perspective, I think the governments are now going to have to put a lot more money into digital networks. I think the one thing that's been highlighted by the COVID-19 across a lot of countries is the fact that the digital infrastructure was just not capable of coping with this volume of traffic. And if we're going to move to remote working, we're going to move to a new way of working around the world. That infrastructure is going to have to be built pretty fast. And that's a huge investment, but I think it has to be done if this is going to be sustainable.
Absolutely. It's been a real test for a lot of carriers and networks and providers. I mean, even Microsoft, to add on that many organizations and users onto their platform overnight. It's just been amazing to see that these big vendors able to cope with the demand. How's that been at your end, Scott?
They really did have to up the number of, so we'll call it server capacity, I guess, within Office 365 as we saw this uptake. But the messaging I'm seeing and hearing, and of course my own experience, is that maybe just a little bit of throttling, we were able to manage it. And of course, I can't speak directly to the types of things that they're doing at that level, because that's not my space. But I've really been impressed with the way that at least the Microsoft Cloud and of course Azure have been performing, because I'm not aware of any major outages during this whole time. So it's been a source of pride for me to watch this happen, as well as just the base knowledge of knowing that when I fire up my laptop in the morning, that it's going to be there for me.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point. That's a really interesting point. It's just always there, and it's really been a great test for the cloud. And hats off to Microsoft for keeping the platform up with just a sheer amount of users being added onto the platform. It's just amazing to see. Great stuff. Okay, well, I think it's about time. I think we've shared some great insights today, gents. Thanks for your time. It's been great talking to you both today.
That was great to meet you. Thank you for your time.
Yes, thank you very much for having me.
My pleasure indeed. So thanks to everyone for watching. If you've enjoyed today's session, we'd really appreciate a like or a share. I'm sure we'll see you again soon. Thank you.